But yeah, why don't we do introductions? Rick, or Scott, do you want to start?
Hi, Scott Turner, board member.
Actor Manager Facilities.
Chris Carlton, Operations Supervisor.
Not a board member. Jeff Netting, Technology and Assessment.
Jill Erickson, Community Ed and Recreation Director.
Mitch Maris, Communications. Brad Hoffman, Principal at Shady Lane Elementary.
Tina Kozansky, Principal at Valley Youth Elementary.
Grant, Principal at Middle School.
Jeff Girls, Director of Business Services.
Honor Terry, School Board Member.
Adrian Dorsey, School Board Member.
Mark Podolsky, School Board Member.
Kip Daly, I'm with Epstein Youth Architects, I'm a communication specialist.
Vikas During, Epstein Unit, good to see you again.
Chris Coggins, VJS Construction Services, Senior Project Manager.
Chad Matthew with BJS. Great to see you all again.
Sean Marshman.
And I'm Pat Greco, I'm the superintendent of schools, so welcome everybody for coming this evening. Jeff and I are actually going to start giving some of the background, just to bring everybody up to date on the progress that we've made. We started the process during the course of last spring into summer. Jeff, you grab a couple more chairs. And at that time, the key target was to actually do a full assessment of the current conditions of all of the buildings, and then to do an educational assessment around the needs of updates that are impacting programming areas. The board has held multiple meetings regarding getting the updates over the course of between the fall into the winter. Last meeting we held was in early May, and at that time the board determined what options they wanted to actually take a look at, how the costing would play out, what it would cost for both a full remodel and a new building in the elementary configuration, what it would also cost if we were looking at the option of demolition. So as we walk through tonight, our core targets are to bring everybody up to speed with the information that we have to date, to take a look at the different configurations, to determine if we need any additional information, and then to talk about what the next steps would be in prioritizing and in communication planning. Within your packet tonight, you have all of the costing to date that was requested. You also have a document that outlines possible communication options if the board would choose to seek feedback from the community regarding referendum planning. So that gives you a little bit of context and background to date. We know the reason for the facility planning is really twofold. One, we have revenue limits placing pressure on programming and the core value of class size, which leads to an examination of, are there other ways to configure the elementary schools that could bring a larger economy of scale. We also know that we have a priority of regular scheduled maintenance, sustaining a solid fund balance. We have key projects that are going to be of need within the next 5 years. The board actually is taking a look at the key priorities over a 5-year period of time, 6 to 10 years, and then beyond 10 years for that longer range facility planning. So the key questions for tonight, if you take a look at the agenda, is how much pressure do we need to relieve in order to not cut programming under the revenue limits? Jeff has additional information on that. What key projects are the highest priorities for programming? What options could be combined in order to accomplish the goals? What does that mean at each level for both the elementary and the secondary level? Corey Gala apologizes tonight. He's not able to attend. His sister-in-law passed away, and they're attending her funeral in lacrosse. And then the recap. So as we take a look at item C under the recap, and then I'm going to turn it Jeff for any of the additional updates. The facility assessment took a look again at all of the buildings that are currently being operated, including TJ and Hiawatha, which are not. Took a look at the routine maintenance need as well as the educational adequacy for the STEM programming, student breakout areas and instructional areas, library updates, auditorium updates, and the update to the fiber network. We're projecting that the fiber network would have to be accomplished, we believe, by the 2017-2018 school year based on the advancement of the technology. Is that correct, Jeff? Is it 16-17 or 17-18?
I think that would be the first one. You said it would be probably the furthest out you want to go.
Okay, so 16-17,
Yeah. That one, I also remember we're leasing, so there's a
right.
return on investment there that have with that, so.
So, and then the fiber upgrades could occur either through a fund balance or be included in a referendum plan if we were advancing that. And then options identification of the elementary configuration, and then options of the unoccupied buildings, understanding that whatever decision we make regarding TJ would have an effect on community education and recreation programming because they currently are using that facility. So that's kind of the scope of where we've been to date. Jeff, Rose, do you want to add anything additional?
I don't think so. I think we want to keep those key questions in mind, that are be there, as we're thinking through, going through all the information that we have tonight. So we can go into the financial outlook. Then next, unless there's other questions or comments on that recap.
Is there anything that the board wants to highlight as we did the recap for the purpose of the updates?
Then we're going to hand out documents as we go. I don't know, have you guys handed yours out yet? Okay, good. So these are going to go both ways. There's going to be a load left on the end, so you can bring them back to me or send them back this way. And pass them around to the outside too, to our guests. So wait for that to go around. We wanted to spend the majority of our time on looking through the different options and then having some discussions. So the first 15 minutes of the meeting, we're ahead of schedule. That's good news. I'm going to keep this part ahead of schedule, I believe.
You guys have none?
So by 6:30, we hope to end with this forecast information, what the debt service looks like, and then some potential timing option comparisons that I'm going to ask to walk through with us. So what you're looking at, we just look at the top section above the dotted line there. We're looking at the budget outlook. So it's looking at our general fund. It's taking into consideration the revenue caps, where we fall into the state aid formula. And I tried to take documents that you've seen before and simplify it and get it all into one document. And I get it, it's probably not looking that simple yet, but it's a summary. It's a real high-level summary here. Top line, you're looking at total revenues in 14-15 based on our budget projection, and then total expenditures for 14-15 based on our budget projection. We were looking at about a $670,000 deficit to start with.
And just for the purpose of the community, one of the key factors that impacts every school district in the state of Wisconsin is the revenue limits do not accelerate at the same rate of inflation. So if you're looking at all conditions staying equal, revenue limits will lift about 1%. Cost of inflation on an annual basis will lift about 3%. It builds in an automatic deficit into public schools that are maintaining or slightly declining in enrollment. So that's the condition that we're maintaining enrollment, but the revenue limits itself eat into the capacity of district spending. So that ends up having the negative impact on student programming. We're not unique in that. It occurs across the state of Wisconsin. It It's not a reflection. Our bond rating and our budget planning are exemplary in comparison to other districts in the state. It's just a fact of where the revenue limits and the caps from the state of Wisconsin work.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I mean, if you look at the expenditure side alone, we're looking at implementing the increases related to any benefit insurance plans, utility costs, and gas expense, electric expense. All those assumptions are built into those numbers. Now, we balance the 14-15 budget year. We're putting those numbers together, and they'll be approved by the preliminary approval has already happened, and then we'll bring it for final preliminary approval to bring that budget then to the annual meeting with actual numbers. So there's showing a $670,000 deficit. That's actually where we started, but that's balanced, and we have some additional, we are using a bit of fund balance in part of our budget planning, but that's to take care of some one-time capital projects in Ben Franklin, really, since we're closing it down this year for summer school. So if you take a look then into 15-16 and compare the revenues to expenditures, and then we added in leverage items. So there's about $1.8 million worth of leverage items built into there. Included in that number for 15-16 is the fiber project. So that's about just over $700,000 that's used in this number. I know we're when we see the later documents, we're talking about $800,000. So it's going to range, but what we put in for leverage is just over $700,000. There's also just over $700,000 in new health insurance fees and things with the Affordable Care Act. So that's in that number also as leverage items. And there's some other leverage items related to curriculum for about $300,000, if I remember right. So that leverage, those are things we're trying to take a look at a 3-year budget plan. And so each division was asked to bring forward their leverage items and any reduction items in those 3 years going forward. So that's why you see in 15-16 and 16-17 the 3 years, and then a small portion in 17-18. 18-19, we haven't gone that far into a 4th year. And again, when you're budget planning and projecting, the further you get out, the more difficult it is to predict. You know, and especially when we're looking at even the 15-16 year, it's a new biennial budget at the state level. So that's going to be a tough planning year. We're making our best estimates at this point based on the information we know today. So this stuff is always a dynamic document, I suppose. Just keeping that in mind. So if you look at the annual change and the cumulative surplus or deficit, again, structural deficit based on what Pat was kind of explaining, how the revenue limits don't keep pace with your expenditures. We're looking at an annual increase in that 15-16 year, about $2.5 million or $2.4 million estimated. That includes the leverage items. Okay, that doesn't take into account any offsetting of those leverage items, which we always do on an annual year. So that number looks really big, but we haven't done any work with it. So keep that in mind. You know, each year, just like when we started with the $668,000. We worked with that number, we added our leverage items, we made the reductions, and we balanced it. So we would do the same thing in 15-16, although there's some big items in there like fiber and insurance, big increases in that number. When you get out to 16-17, 17-18, it's a more manageable annual increase of $500,000 each of those 2 years. And then in that 18-19 year, which I kind of want to discount that year because it's really hard to predict out that far. There's a portion of some non-referendum debt in that number that inflates it to a $4 million. So it's not a good number to look at, but the $500,000 over this next couple of years gives you an idea of what we're looking at to accomplish under the project. If you backed out, let's say the two $700,000 numbers that I mentioned for 15-16, that's called $1.5 million off of that 2.4. You're really looking at closer to about $1 million or just under, right?
Or do I say 2.4 minus leverage of 1.8 is 600?
Yeah.
Either way, your starting point really is 600.
Right. So before you factor in the leverage and things, you're talking about, you know, if you went 500 to 750,000, that would be probably the need if we went operational.
And what that would mean is if you did an operational referendum question, it would actually lift the revenue limit by that amount for as long as that value would hold without being eat up by the inflation again. So that would be the question for the community.
So if we were to do nothing, that's where the fund balance line comes in. I don't know if that's relevant to tonight's discussion or not. Probably not, because we would always take care of our budget. We would never let the fund balance do what that line item shows. You know, seeing a decrease from 9.3 million down to negative. That's not going to happen. But if we did nothing, that's what it would look like.
Jeff, for our viewing audience and maybe since you explain what our choices are to do something.
Where our choices are. Well, we would look at our leverage items.
Yeah, well, how we would offset what our leverage items would be.
Yeah, so we would look at, with the health insurance alone, you know, we'd have to somehow do something with premium to adjust for the additional fees that are coming on with the Affordable Care Act. The fiber project, we have to make a decision. Is that a fund balance project? Or is that, are we going to, you know, make reductions to fit that into the regular budget? So that's all the budget planning that goes on between December and March, where we make those difficult decisions on staffing and
Staff programming.
staffing, programming, class size. Those are the things that are impacted when we do the budget planning. That's the budget outlook, top half of the paper. Any questions on that piece? Trying to keep it tight. We'll move down, it gives you an idea. We'll move down to the debt service outlook. And I just looked at the debt service levy alone. So in 14-15, we've got a total debt service that includes referendum and non-referendum debt of about 3.2 million. In 15-16 budget year, fiscal year, we'll see that debt service levy come down to about 2.5 million. So that's where the ledge is. We've got a ledge in our debt service levy for the 15-16 fiscal year. It actually happens in calendar year 16, but the way you levy and the way you budget, it's going to affect us on our tax levy in 15-16 levy year. The line underneath that, where it's got an asterisk, it says available debt levy, no impact. What I tried to do there is just fill in that ledge with a dollar amount to get a total debt levy that is equal across years. So, you know, you can see our debt service across the line is pretty similar once we hit that ledge. It runs around 2.5 to 2.6 million. And then you put in your available room to keep that levy at what it's currently at, about 3.2 million. And it's running from around $500,000 to $600,000, you know, as you look across those numbers that we could fill in without having any impact on the debt levy itself. Okay? This does not take into consideration any losses in state aid on the general fund side, because we don't know what those numbers are. So I started to put those numbers together, and they weren't making sense. So I thought this is a more accurate picture of what our debt looks like if we decide to add to the debt or not. So that's what you're seeing there. The equalized value is not bolded there, kind of in the middle section of that bottom half. You can see in 15-16, we're predicting a decrease to the total equalized value of the district. 16-17, we're predicting a 0 increase, no decrease, no increase. 17-18, a 0.5% increase. 18-19, a 1% increase. So the impact of the equalized value is it affects the tax rate. So as you have it, you know, if your debt levy stayed constant, and you just put it up against the equalized value, divide your total levy, or your debt levy in this case, by the equalized value, you can see the debt service on a mill rate basis, down at the bottom of the paper now, debt service is $1.04, 14-15. 83 cents because of the debt ledge. In 15-16, 84, 83, 85. So it remains pretty constant on a mill rate basis. And then if you were to use that ledge and fill it in with additional debt of the $600,000 or the $600,000 range, it's about 20 to 22 cents is what you can fill in there. So the mill rate keeping the mill rate constant would allow us to issue about $11 million in new debt without having an impact on the debt levy itself.
Jeff, is it fair to say that if we were looking at increments of $10 million in addition to that, it would be about 20 cents on the mill rate? Is it fair to take that dollar amount and do it in increments of 10 million so the board understands what effect it would have on the mill rate?
I think for tonight's purposes, that would work. I would want to refine that, but I think it's reasonable.
Okay.
How the ledge happen again? Explain to people.
Sure. We had a balloon payment. We just did a major refinance.
What did we save by, how much did we save?
This last time we saved 323,000 somewhere in there.
The last round was how much?
The round before that was 1.2 million, I think, 1.2, 1.3 million. So in total, that issue of debt that we refinanced over two different cycles, 2 years, saved us just over $1.5 million on that issue. We took debt that we were paying 5% and brought it down to under 2%. And the saving on that has been really significant. So that helped us create that ledge. We also, in this last refinance, had a payment that we restructured, saving some additional dollars. It wasn't nearly as significant as those of the other one, but it creates a ledge for us. So if we choose not to use that ledge in the first year, in 15, 16, we could always pay down additional debt on our existing debt going forward to keep that levy where it is. So we don't see major fluctuations in the tax rate and the tax levy going forward.
Is there a time limit for the debt levy before it has to be renewed in public?
So what's the annual action? What's the public action on the debt service fees? Like, are you entitled by law to issue more without anything, or do they have to say, well, we agree to this?
We have to.
How does that work?
The only way you can issue new debt.
Right, I was trying to.
Yeah,
What's that?
same question.
Okay. So the only way to issue new debt is through a referendum. Okay.
So you said we
I'm
can
gonna
issue.
I'm gonna start over about, are you asking how does the board actually take the action?
No, it was more to explain to someone that says, if you're considering issuing more debt because you've got new projects that you're considering, then if I'm Joe Public, what you're basically would say is, well, look, I'd like to, let's say $650,000. For 10 years, I want to do $650,000, and you don't have to pay any more than your tax rate than you are currently, but it allows us to do more under the current tax rate. Is in a sense, that's what would happen, right?
Right. If we were to issue new debt, that would require a referendum, but if we were to defease debt and pay down old debt, we could do that without.
Understand, right, but that's kind of not the scenario you're painting. You're basically saying, you give me the same amount of money that you did last year, and I'm going to do more with it than we would have planned for in the past, because we've done other good things to make this now eligible.
Yeah.
In a sense, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
And our debt our current debt expires when?
Total debt?
Yes.
I want to say it's 2027. Don't quote me on that. It's right in that ballpark. I think that's when it gets.
And it's like any other mortgage in a sense that, if you look 5 years ago, we were paying more in interest than principal, and now it's gone the other way. So you're 60-40 principal as opposed to 30-60 principal, 40-60, 4 or 5 years ago. So it's starting to, be more efficient as far as pay down. Plus the defeasance we did. Refinancing and the defeasance. So we paid down early on our mortgage and we refinanced on interest costs for the last 3 or 4 years to the tune of a couple $1 million, I think.
Yeah, we've had some real opportunities with the low interest rates, but we took advantage of those opportunities too, and we held out at times, knowing or feeling like rates are going to come down some more, and that all that savings is what has allowed us to create this kind of a ledge in there to be able to potentially fill to maintain future facilities.
So that's the thing, that's what you're trying to frame for.
Exactly.
That piece of it, right?
Correct.
The way I said it earlier.
So Scott gets it. Is there questions from others, though?
I was trying to keep it in layman's terms.
Yeah,
When
thank
you
you.
start talking mill rate and stuff.
Thank you.
If I paid you $100, I'm still gonna pay you 100, but you're gonna do more with it. Right. Right?
Yeah.
That's what you're just gonna. So beyond that, is there anything else you want to show on the sheet?
No, that's all.
Okay.
There's no question about that. And I took a lot of kids' time, so sorry.
Do you want to see if what I'm
Sure.
talking about?
So, Ted, another hand up here. Thanks, and come on out. So in these sections, 2B, potential timing options, comparisons. So get prepared for us. Bailey is, help me with. I'm not
no, that's a good
that person
question.
with EUA, really helpful on the planning.
Sure.
And the timing of things related to potential referendum or not. So,
Sure, would you like me to?
I'm going to ask you to walk through
Okay,
this document
yes.
for us, Ted.
Well, I'm Kit, and as I said, I work for EUA, but I'm not an architect, so I just want to make sure there's a very wide open disclaimer about that around the table. All my construction friends know I'm not an architect. But I am a specialist in communications, specifically helping school districts through the referendum process. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been involved with more than 160 referenda. So far, 133 of those have passed, so we're on the right track record. Although I only worry about the ones that fail. So anyways, I joined EUA 5 years ago because EUA was really recognizing that more and more clients, school district clients, were struggling with the referendum process and the communication and community engagement side of how do we move through these complex processes when it comes to facilities that really are impacting students and changing the shape of our community. So I had partnered with them on a few different projects, and they offered me the opportunity to come work with them. So I did that 5 years ago, and I'm an integral part of the team. So I'm here as a resource to you in Menominee Falls as part of the EUA team, and I've been collaborating a little bit with Jeff at BJS just to help us kind of understand where you're going. And it seems to me that you're kind of at a crossroads where you've done a lot of background work, you've got a strong foundation of understanding your needs, right? You've got a pretty detailed facility assessment done, and EUA and BJS have helped you kind of start looking at those big ideas, we'll call them, about how we could potentially look for operational savings, certainly how we could address some of the deferred maintenance needs, opportunities to find some of that operational savings to defer some of the operational deficits that you're looking at going forward. So you're kind of at a point where you need to start thinking about what are the solutions that we move forward to the community and find out what they think about it as well. And so part of that process is also understanding, in my experience, the timing for how and when to go to referendum. And one of the things that I've become a strong advocate for is really kind of understanding from kind of backward designing it, looking at it and saying, okay, when are our referendum opportunities? How does that align with where we are in this process and what we need to continue to do to make sure that when we go to referendum, we have really good feedback from our community, we feel like our solution is really modeling what they value, and what is likely to be successful. Because I'm sure you don't want to go through a process and not be successful, right? And that's just a lot of work. And it's hard on the board, it's hard on the administration. So the goal is to put you in a position so that you're continuing to advance the process, and you go to referendum when the time is right. And there's a lot of different theories about that. So I put together this kind of evaluation tool, if you will, at the direction of Pat and Jeff, as a way for you to kind of start thinking about potential dates. Now, there's absolutely no commitment here. We're not recommending a specific date, and I hope that as you look at this, you're recognizing there's at the top, I'm not talking about these as factors that are advantages or disadvantages necessarily, but just things that as a board and as an administration you should be thinking about to position yourself for success. Really, that's the critical component. When you go, you want to be ready and you want to feel confident that you've got the right plan in front of your community. And in my experience, time is your friend. So typically moving really too quickly through that process, specifically if you have complex options, which frankly you do have some complex options that are in the mix, that is something that needs to be considered carefully. So with that in mind, what we did was we talked about the potential referendum dates that are coming up in the most close future. So where we sit here in June of 2014, your next, other than this November, because you're really, no way are you ready for November. So I think we eliminated that a couple months ago. You'd have to be adopting resolutions in August, and that's just not practical. So let's just be practical and move forward. So in odd years, you have the opportunity only in our fine state of Wisconsin to go to election on a regularly scheduled election when it is in the spring. So you have February, which is the primary to the spring election. So you have February and you have April. Those are the only regularly scheduled elections in odd years. So we're coming into an odd year. In even years, you also have the primary and the general in the fall. So that's hence why we have a November election coming up and an August primary. So that's important for you to consider. Why? Because as you look forward and you think about going forward with a plan, a proposal, whether that's operational referendum or it's a facilities referendum or a combination of both, you need to think about what is the right approach here in Menominee Falls. A general election is a regularly scheduled election, and a special election is something you have the opportunity to do. You could go to special election in Wisconsin without very many restrictions, whereas in some states you really have a lot of loopholes. There has been some legislation pending to try and eliminate that option, but that has not passed. So right now you still have the option in an odd year to go, anytime really, to go to a special election. So when you look at these dates, it talks about February and April 2015 as your next regularly scheduled election. November of 2015 as an option to consider that we would put on the table for you to think about if you were to go to special election in 2015, because your needs were pressing and you felt like you really needed to move that forward. The recommendation would be November, because people tend to typically vote in November, right? We're programmed. We learned that in grade school, that we vote in November. So if you're going to go to special election, there's a lot of data that supports going when there would have been a general. So that's sort of why we have November targeted there as an option for you to consider. And then we're talking about February and or April, the spring primary and regularly scheduled election in 2016, which I know right now seems like a long way away, and oh my gosh, we just saw the deficits and we have all these needs that we learned about, and that seems like a long way away. But as we kind of walk through, I think there's just variables to consider. So as we talked about, the regularly scheduled elections are the February, April of both 15 and 16. November would be a special. And the one thing to keep in mind about a special election is that the school district would be required to pay 100% of the costs of holding that election. So it's a factor that we would want to investigate to make sure we understand what those costs will be. For example, in 2011, we had a special election with the Muskego Norway district, which is a similar size, and that cost them about $30,000 out of pocket. And that's because you have to pay for all staff at pollings, you have to pay for all the paper that the ballots are printed on, all the absentee ballots, everything that goes into running an election when there's nothing else on the ballot is solely paid for by the district. So it's just a factor to consider. You also need to evaluate in this district, what's the public perception of going on an off election? Is that a good thing? Is it, are people comfortable with that? Obviously, Mitch would be doing a fantastic job with your communication, so it's not like they didn't know that there's a referendum coming, but it's something that some districts people have a negative perception of. You're trying to go and no one else is on the ballot, things like that. So it's just a factor we would want to evaluate if you're talking seriously about November. And there are some opportunities from a construction perspective about November always being a positive in terms of getting design done, being able to break ground and actually get work underway quickly in the spring as opposed to an April referendum, right guys? So it's just, there's variables with timing, right? So that's when it comes to looking at election cycles and those pros and cons, or if you want to call them that, factors, I should say, those are just some things to think about. Is there anything about the election cycle before I go on that you have questions about? Does that make sense to you? You guys, what's the history in Menominee Falls of going to special election? Have you done that before? Do you know?
I don't think most of the special election was it.
Don't think
No,
so.
I don't remember when we did the ice bottom. I think it was in the normal voting cycle.
Well, there are ways to do voter analysis, to look at demographics and try and get a read on that.
That's what we did for us.
And typically, I will say that When you have debt questions, facility-related questions on the ballot, your voter turnout is higher because people respond to that, they hear about it, they talk about it. We're going to be doing a lot of engagement, a lot of communication about it. So it's not that I'm worried that you wouldn't have a voter turnout, but certainly election data, if you run it on success referenda, the highest success rate for Wisconsin school referenda is without a doubt November general elections. So that puts you at November coming up, or November of 2016 is another alternative, but that's getting pretty far out. But there is election data that, if you're interested, I can bring you, that shows you that that's when the highest rate of success is. So, okay, moving down the list, these are just factors that we need to think about. One of the factors that you have is a referendum is an opportunity for you to address immediate needs, correct? You could certainly go after your immediate operational needs, some discussion about your capital maintenance and technology infrastructure, that fiber project. Those are all things that could be put into a referendum scope. Could be operational, could be a debt question, could be a combination. There's factors and ways to do that. We just advanced, the Kevin Moraine School District had a $49 million referendum on the ballot in April, and a big chunk of that was related to technology infrastructure and putting in fiber. So there are certainly ways to do that and make that a capital debt question as opposed to an operational. So when you kind of look at the factors about timing, if you're talking about a referendum to exceed the revenue limit, which is what Pat was talking about, exceeding that cap and raising that, there's variables you'll have to think about. Are you talking about what's called a recurring question, which means you ask for that amount, 500 to 700, for example, that Jeff is using, that becomes a baseline, a new baseline, you raise it, and then that stays in impact on your mill rate into perpetuity, if you will. I mean, you raise it, and then thank goodness it's always there. The problem is will that be enough in 5 years? That's changing the budget, and it's kind of unknown. And recurring referenda do have a weaker track record in terms of success, because I think some communities see it as a little bit of an open checkbook, although that's not really the case, but perception-wise. You also have the option on operational referendum to go with what's called a non-recurring, which has a very defined start and end date. So many districts go 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's the most common for non-recurring questions. And you would say to your community, we will exceed the revenue limit for this amount for these to last for these years. And then it would expire. So you'd have to do some analysis about how far out do you go. We worked on a project a few years ago where they actually did a 10-year non-recurring referendum. So it sort of felt like a recurring, but it was 10 years. So those are variables on the operational question. And frankly, when you're talking about your elections cycle, that operational referendum is probably most doable for February and April of 2015. Because as we sit here in June. And part of that has to do with, if you skip down, you'll see the legal adoption of resolutions. There's a 70-day requirement. And what that does, if you look at February and April elections, for you to be on the ballot in February, this board would be finalizing all plans and adopting the resolutions in December, the first week of December, which is about 6 months from now. If you were to go in April, your deadline would be the last week of January. So factors to consider is all the things you need to continue to do to work through the options that you're considering. And backing them up to that 70 days. It used to be 40 days, 42 days, and that changed about a year ago. And I think that was great because it gives you more time to communicate and to make sure people understand what's going on, but it does back the timelines up.
So what's the timeline for community engagement?
Well, that's a great question.
Can you restate that?
I said, look, at the end of the day, we don't know where we're going yet. So this is all good because it gives us the outline, but we got to know where we're going first. And the bigger issue is not even so much the 70 days prior to the election, it's the time to engage the community prior to that 7 days.
Right.
That's the legal requirement, right?
Right, the legal one is the least of your worries.
I
You can always get there, but I think one of the things that I said you're kind of at this crossroads, because the options that you're considering and trying to understand and vet here as a board and start to prioritize, I'm sure you want to have some engagement of your community about it. And as you look at the potential components of that, potentially closing schools, potentially changing some grade levels or shifting them around, you've got some complexity in this project that I think you want to evaluate your community's response to before you just throw a referendum out there. Which is why when you look across, we talked about the opportunity to address very comprehensive long-term needs. If you were looking at one of those solutions that these guys are going to review in more detail, in my professional experience, I would think you're going to need at a minimum to be looking at November of 15, just to work through that process is internally as a board, as a team, and to have engagement that's meaningful. And I know Mitch and I both were part of a process last summer where we heavily invested in understanding public participation strategies and how to do that effectively. And none of them are about doing it as quickly as possible and giving people one opportunity to tell you what you did. So it's sort of a concerted effort that we need to work through. And a lot of information needs to be shared in order for people to give you good informed feedback, right? Because if people just give you their top of the cuff, they're going to give you their response to cost. So we're going to want people to go deeper than that, which means we need to educate them more fully, which is really sort of the timing conversation. So when you look down the other list, what opportunity do you have? Do you want to factor in the staff engagement? Staff are critical. Staff are absolutely critical to referendum success. You want to be going to and communicating and talking to and listening to your staff before you even go beyond your staff. And I'm sure principals are here. You're part of that conversation. You need to help foster that conversation with staff, because if not, the anxieties about these things can very easily get ahead of us. And then when you layer that, the opportunity for other community engagement, there's tons of different strategies that could be used. You need to find the right approach here in Menominee Falls, but as I said, a lot of them take a little bit of time to do them. Good community-wide survey, even a strong survey, takes 8 to 10 weeks at the minimum to do that well. And that's not even counting figuring out what goes into the survey. I mean, that's a big part of the equation. So as you kind of look through that, I think you'll see that there are opportunities to do things in February, but you really do compromise staff outreach, you compromise community engagement outreach on the extensive capital facilities planning. I think you have more opportunity to do that thoroughly, and if you look at later in 15 and 16, we talked a little bit about the fact that in the past you have had community advisory-based committees work, and I think some of you, I think actually were on. Some of you came from a committee on the last referendum, is that what I recall? Any of you serve on that committee? Thought so. Okay, so there's a track
Before I
record.
was on the board.
Right, there's a track record of having engagement at that level. It's something to consider. Is that a key to success here in Menominee Falls? So what role would that play, and how do we leave enough time to do that? That's not something that you just convene in the middle of the summer and then you do 6 weeks of work. It takes time. That's just the reality of the process. And so then you also have to evaluate for every single one of these timelines, do we have the opportunity to do a comprehensive public information and outreach? So that's when decisions are made. That's not what to do. It's, okay, we've heard you, we've listened, we're responding to our needs, you've helped us prioritize. We are clearly going to be responding to what you value in the community. Now we're telling you, this is what we're proposing, we're answering your questions, we're doing outreach in every way, shape, and form. So can you do that? Yes, in every option, I think you have the opportunity to do that. Part of it depends on your solution, right? And certainly the opportunity to take advantage of this debt service drop-off, this ledge, as Jeff talked about, it's a great opportunity to be able to say to your community, we can minimize the impact of additional facility improvements going forward. There's different strategies on how to do that. But that's a great place to be. You don't want to ignore that and miss that debt drop opportunity. That would be a missed opportunity for sure. The other thing to keep in mind, I'm just throwing these out there, some districts feel really are worried about election cycles, referenda that relate to board elections, which April, right? April is all about you guys getting reelected. Someone's getting reelected every year, right? Some districts that becomes a big concern, in other districts it's not. So it's just something, that's why February is not typically, in some cases is the avenue. We have one district we're working with now that is seriously looking at February because they're very concerned about that April board platform, referendum agenda, driving the board makeup. Every district's a little different. So it's just factors to think about. And then last but not least, one thing to always think about is the longer you delay projects, the more they're going to cost. That's any of these guys could talk about that, and certainly you know that, and obviously there's also the variables with interest rates, which are still, pretty low right now. Maybe not as low as they were a year ago, but, so those are some factors that, as you think about moving forward, you think about timing, you want to think about how do we back up and how do we accomplish what we need to do in the middle so that we're working through a very transparent process with our community that allows you to build trust and talk about options and variables. And in our experience, when you have complexities, some of the ones that you're considering, it just takes a little more time. If it was a very clean, straight, easy solution, we're adding an addition here, we're building a new school, we're simply adding into addressing deferred maintenance. Those are all things that you might have in play, they all kind of mix together. So there's probably plenty other things to consider when you're going to referendum, but those were the top of the list ones that we had talked about. Any questions on that, or does that help you? Did I completely freak you out? I wasn't trying to.
I don't think now everybody's freaked out.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, it's, again, with the end in mind, you got to calendar the whole thing. But back to my original point, we don't know where we're at yet, so until we know that, then, but the long look is, the long view is what we need, so you'll get community engagement if you started out wrong.
Yes, yes, you will.
Make the wrong comment.
You
at
can
the
engage
start of
with
the
the pulse
process.
of the.
Yeah, we get a good dust up.
This is really helpful.
Yeah, it's good.
And this
Thank
time
you.
period, it seems right.
What's that?
This time period seems right.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we got to figure out this, construction changes prior to school year, and then you got to back into the whole community engagement. But again, we're not sure, we have no concept of exactly what we prioritize or value yet to create the community piece, to create the calendar, right? So we're still in discussion at all.
Yeah, it's helpful if the board establishes your priorities, your drivers, your goals, which I know is what we're trying to accomplish tonight as well, and then to share that with the community, share that with staff, find out where you parallel, where there might be gaps, and start to flesh that out, rather than old school is you guys just come up with it and then you just see if it'll stick. And that's really not the most effective way to get there successfully. Although there seems to be some districts that think so. We'll try to help you not do that.
What's our next finance meeting?
July 10th.
Sharing some, figuring out some of the good things that we've done, doing a better job of monitoring some of that. Because I'd like these guys to be as well versed as my brain is on some of those things, but we'll talk about that offline.
I think I got you back off your timeline. Thought you came.
We're going to be all right. I have 2 hours. Okay. For this next section, I think we're going to take out both sides.
All right, we are now ready to take a look at how the options and the needs have been framed off of the last discussion we had with the board of what if we consider these array. What you're going to notice is in each of the pyramids, the only thing that changes is the elementary design. The middle school and the high school, it's really a matter of which core needs do you value and which ones would you choose to advance. So we'll wait until the handouts go over there.
So I should start with an area?
Yeah, just the costumes, that was just to show you the format. What you got in the email is different than what's coming around tonight, because the costume is completed.
With each of these referendum principles, when was construction?
Extra copies of the buildings.
Typically, 5-6 months after the referendum with early bid packages, sometimes sooner, depending on what they are. So if you've got smaller projects that can be packaged, so then perhaps they might go out 3 months after. But for, entire building projects, the entire compendium of packages might take 6 to 8 months. But they can get started with some of the work, so the days, that's fine. Once you drill down, we'll be able to, strategize.
Were you asking about opening, when they would open or be completed or
Oh,
start?
begin.
Oh, begin, sure.
So in the handout, and Jeff and I went on a conference call with this entire team. What you have is the list of every project that was discussed is really outlined on the first page. I'm going to walk you through the next 3 pages. And really what I want you to look at is the title of the document so you know what it's describing, okay? So if you look at page 2, the second page, it says current elementaries stay as is, and/or the board considers taking the current structure and doing the unbalanced partners that we discussed at the last meeting, because it didn't need the significant additional space, but it needs some, okay? But the board also understands, last time we talked about the disadvantage of having the grade configurations not the same at the 4 elementary schools. So we had talked about that also. This option would take TJ offline, and you'll see within it what demolition costs would mean. It would take Hiawatha offline and TJ offline, okay? So if you take a look at everything from the base of the pyramid on up, past the refined entrance of Shady Lane, if you look at D through R, you're going to find that on each of the remaining 2 pyramids, because that really reflects the work at the secondary levels, north and high school. Okay? If you look at the bottom of this pyramid, what's included is the 5-year routine maintenance for each of the 4 elementary schools and staying in the current elementary structures. That actually is that dollar amount at the bottom of the pyramid. Okay?
As well as middle and high school.
As well as middle and high school, yes. Okay, so that really, it starts out with routine maintenance needs.
Well, routine, define routine.
The ones that they identified as the projects that would be necessary in years 1 through 5, not going through 6 through 12, or 6 through 10.
No, recommended.
Recommended.
Not necessary.
Right,
My bathroom needs new tile, which is recommended.
right,
But my bathroom doesn't need to be retiled.
right,
I would recommend it because it's better, right?
right.
Right?
But you can get by without it, is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying, routine and necessary are both recommended, right? Recommended, right? You recommend all the bathrooms get ADA and fixed and upgraded. That's part of that,
Yep.
correct?
So, and it brings it up to ADA compliance, like you just said.
Yeah, however you want to define it, it's recommended on all accounts. Or in some cases, it could be past usable life and is necessary, like the boiler's going to blow, that could be in there. Or it could be the tiles are old and that could be in there. Yeah, right, but it's all various shades of necessity.
Exactly, as I said.
All right, yeah.
Are we going to go over these lines, for example, text, to reconfigure is elementary changes? What is that?
Yeah, we can explain it. It's working within the schools to reconfigure rooms for 4K and 5K. For instance, at Franklin, using current again, that to house that, some reconfiguring in the rooms needs to happen. We have plans backing that up for each one. So it's a very elementary level of what's necessary to meet the
Space is
Yeah.
around 4K, 5K, that's really the difference in that.
But that's only necessary if we move 4K from Ben Franklin, right?
If you did the unbalanced partners, because you have to reconfigure one of the sites.
Right, also, so you're right, the bottom line X there, if you kept things as is, you don't need X, right? If you go to unbalanced partners, then you need X.
Well, even if you go to balanced partners, because somebody's.
Balanced partners
Balance,
is a different option.
Right, but you're still gonna have to do something to take care of the movement.
Right, and that'll be shown on
Yeah,
a future
that's the
sheet.
second
And
option.
just for my memory, as well as anybody that happens to be watching this, what is the downside to imbalance from an educational perspective?
The biggest question, it's really educationally, the schools will still do a great job teaching the children, and the principals will work with whatever grade levels they're assigned. Parents will have a hard time understanding that the transition grade on one side of town is first grade, and the transition grade on another side of town will be between second and third, right?
Yeah, we did fourth, fifth, and one building, so
Okay.
third
Yeah,
and
so,
fourth.
right, so
It's just the parents.
it would most significantly impact that communication piece within the community. And obviously, you have a different ability for the grade level teachers to actually work across, the different buildings. So if one building has only 4 or 5, and the other building that's the feeder school has the opposite, it's really going to be part of that communication around the curriculum exchange. But we deal with that currently, because not all of the grade levels are together.
So is your intent to go through each of the files individually, or are you just trying to hit
I'm-
the changes on the top and then?
What I want you to first understand is what each sheet represents, so that we can go back and talk about them in depth. Does that make sense?
Just going back to 4K. 4K, we're still paying off that debt. Now we're talking about moving 4K. Is it truly necessary to move 4K? That's right.
You could leave 4K there, but if you were creating the unbalanced partners, you would be creating a second transition for the kids as opposed to one. So if you had 4K all at Ben Franklin, and they had to go to 5K over at Valley View, then they'd be transitioning again to Shady Lane, so their elementary experience would have 2 transitions as opposed to 1. So that would really be the downside of leaving 4K together if we went to the unbalanced partner schools.
Well, whether it's unbalanced or not, is there going to be, they go from BF to the Riverside, comes back to BF.
Correct.
So
You're
whether
absolutely
you're balanced or
Yeah,
not.
right.
But with regard to us still paying the debt, those ones would be easily occupied by kids.
Right.
They should just, we just move them to pay it.
Yeah. 4K and 5K configuration is really similar. So, those rooms would be utilized regardless.
In fact, the renovation on that scenario of unbalanced is to move 4K to an area of BF and expand the size, I believe, of some of those. I don't know what grade is in there today, but.
They're the first.
So it would
ones.
use all of those current 4K program, classrooms as 5K. We put that all as 5K because there's more sections of that. You need less physical rooms for 4K because they run AM and PM. So it's, for 6 sections, you run that in 3 classrooms.
So basically, we need to upgrade Valley View
To get 4K in there. There's one small section at BF also that needed some.
If we didn't remodel to have balance, would that not allow us flexibility? Because we're always going to have different levels. You may have a bulge somewhere, your 3rd grade this year is huge. You're going to have to accommodate them differently as they live through the system. Instead of locking in and saying always that would be X through X. give yourself some flexibility. I may not be explaining it correctly, but it gives yourself the opportunity to say, okay, this year, next year, we might be 4K through 1, but the following year, because the bulge is the 1, it's going to stay, you know, what I'm saying is they can work around your growth. It may have to be 4, you don't have enough people behind it, so they can stay 4K through 2. Well, bulge year goes on early. Instead of locking ourselves in and saying, all is going to be this
As a
grade.
parent, my opinion would be, it would drive me nuts.
It's up to communicate.
But that's not what we're here to, are we here to debate that piece?
No,
or
the only thing I want you to do right now is understand it,
I understand.
okay? All right, so you take a look at it. I'll read up the lines so that you understand how the flow chart works. It's identical on each of the remaining pages. So A and S is the maintenance and the upgrades to the bathrooms. X is if you tackle the unbalanced partners. C is the reclined entrance at Shady Lane, which relocates the administration area into that center point. D is,
Address the parking in that,
Yes.
yeah,
that's included.
It includes safety, security, secure entrance, parking problem for parents, safety issues, the staff parking in the back.
All the stuff that goes on.
And where is that back up? I remember talking about it, it was somewhere documented in this package.
Yeah, you'll see the drawings momentarily.
I'm not looking for drawings, I'm looking for numbers.
I believe that BGS has everything.
Yeah, we don't, there's a lot more information that was shared in the previous meeting, and even the information that we didn't share, I'll back up on all of this, that we did not have, just sort of put it out there.
And the reason I'm asking is, there may be pieces of that, you know, we start looking at grand numbers that don't fit in.
Sure,
It
absolutely.
might not be economical for us right now to do the parking lot, but we change the entrance.
Yeah, and we've talked internally also about communication and how we're communicating with pieces. That's not necessarily our expertise, and that's something that we would correct once we got to a point where we need to do that.
What would be helpful for me would be if I saw $724,000 indented underneath it would be parking lot, basement.
Sure.
Front door value. Then I'd like to go through and say, yeah, we're the front door, and now I'm going to get another door here and just in the parking lot. So,
Yeah, when we have all that, we get back into that detail when it's.
right, but what I'm saying, so that we can actually see it, because eventually we're going to see it.
Sure.
okay, if you take a look at Q, it's that the additional instructional space in the second floor of the high school, shifting it from teacher planning space to actual instructional space with students, which is about 4,000 square feet. The project lead the way number includes both north and the high school, the lower level. Library upgrades to north and the high school. The north auditorium, the high school auditorium. R represents the band room and the reconfiguration at the middle school. The asbestos abatement at TJ and demolition, we have the dollar amount there, we take it offline, and then the asbestos abatement and demolition of Hiawatha. At the very top of the pyramid was the updated costs of if the field house were back in the conversation regarding the high school. We did not include anything additional as a dollar amount regarding any of the other athletic fields or the bathroom facilities. So that dollar amount, that's really what that other high school athletic upgrades, that's what that line is there for, should the board want to consider any additional allowance. Okay, so that's really how the flow chart works. If you take a look at the next page,
And then Pat, just so everybody understands also, we do have pricing for the 6-year plus capital improvements, we haven't included any of that in any of these pyramids. So right now, we're assuming that's later, that's not part of any of our conversations.
And you'll remember at the last meeting, when we went through all of these detailed grids, and before you still have these had the dollar amounts for the 6 to 10 year needs in them, in that master sheet, as far as the back documents. If you take a look at the next page, again, focus on the header. This is the balanced partner. I'll point out one additional thing. If you take a look at the running total on the side, the dollar amounts add up while they're in the gray box. The dollar amounts on the right are the cumulative if you took that tier and everything below it. Does that make sense? So if you take a look at the base of the pyramid in this scenario, the 5-year maintenance and the core elementary changes, this would be a more extensive changing of the classrooms. It creates Ben Franklin as a 4K through 2, Riverside 3 through 5, Valley View would get a more extensive addition, 4K through 2, and Shady Lane grades 3 through 5. So it's creating partner schools with the same transition grades, but it's keeping the current 4 elementary schools online. You know, the advantage to that is we get the economy of scale of locating the grade levels together. And the downside is we're still functioning with 4 elementary schools that all need, the updates. So that part, the board understands. It provides the defined entrance to Shady Lane, and then with letter D on up, each of those options remain the same. Does that make sense?
Just another key piece to this option and the previous option would be that TJ is sitting out there, something needs to be done or not done in community rent.
And we talked about that because we're going to have to make another determination of at what point TJ provides a value to the community for community added rec. And this goes back to Scott's earlier comment of those boilers are on the verge of not being usable. So how long do you leave that structure, either not reinvesting in it or not taking it down? And if you take it down, obviously the effect it would have on the programming with community ed and rec with no replacement to that. So those are all of the things that we have to consider as we think about that end decision with TJ.
Can you paint a picture about what the balanced partner configuration work is? So obviously you're doing much more construction on Valley View, for instance, to balance it out. What is the extent of that?
Let me just go to Plan 3 and then I'll have these guys actually take you through the photos. Okay, because they have drawings of what it would look like for each of these. Okay, right? Okay. The last page, if you take a look at the consideration, this is not keeping Valley View. Take Valley View offline. This would demo TJ and put a new school site at TJ. So the schools that would be operated would be Ben Franklin. And the grade configurations would be 4K through 5th grade at all 3 sites, correct, Jeff?
4K through 5th grade, yes, all 3 sites.
And you'll notice at the bottom, it is the new elementary school, It's the 5-year maintenance, but not including Valley View. It's the restroom renovations. It's the advanced addition at Shady Lane, because they need not just the office relocation, they would need the 4K classrooms added. So that's actually where it's the difference between the refined and advanced on the Shady Lane addition, okay? The fiber and everything else going up from there would be the same. It would also, you would have to include, obviously, the demolition costs of TJ. So you would have to go up to that point, okay? So in all likelihood, we should, in this option, as we're using it, we should probably take N and M and include them in the base, because you really have to do those if we were doing this option. Does that make sense?
It does, yes, and we don't have the demo Valley View in this. So that would be closed.
And, well, Valley View would be closed and sold,
Yeah.
yeah, it wouldn't be our responsibility for demoing it, is the recommendation in theory. Okay. We did talk about relocating the soccer fields onto the TJ site, and we did talk about how that could potentially play out. Okay. So now we'll go back to the front and take a look at the photos.
Did we consider some things to do with tear down, lose Valley View, lose the gym? We're already struggling with this. Gym space
No,
between
actually,
us and the rec department.
yeah, because Riverside would then be fully community ed and rec, you would actually gain a larger gym than what Valley View currently has in TJ, and community ed and rec would have a lot more capacity with Riverside. So,
It's not a separate gym, it's the same gym that's there now.
but it's currently used by Riverside all day
Right.
long.
Right, but I'm thinking at night, when activities are going on, all the schools are practicing, we're down the gym. Is what I'm saying.
That's true.
We don't use TJ at night for,
Yeah, they use
like
TJ.
basketball.
Yeah, they use
For
TJ
basketball
for
practice
basketball.
and all the,
Yeah.
for rec activities.
Yeah.
But like for the rec, or the,
Well, a lot of people, they use the old wrestling room at TJ, they use the gym, they use the gym at Valley View.
Yeah.
There's a lot, there's more than we know.
Yeah. Yeah,
likely
and
basketball.
the other thing that you could consider, you know, we projected the new building of TJ being really similar to Ben Franklin with, you know, the dual-sided. You could actually expand that into a third station with the construction if we needed to. You know, if that would be the recommendation of the board. So that would be another option.
What you just said, Pat, you're saying because Valley View is really a single gym.
Right, and
Added another court
TJ
onto
would be a mirror of what Ben Franklin is, which is a 2-station gym. You could, in theory, if it were deemed necessary, you could make it a 3-station gym. You know, or the auxiliary, because then that would be built with also a cafeteria. You know, which is different than what Valley View is. You know, so those would be other considerations.
As well as the high school. You know,
Do we have pricing, things like, this is just a boiler, if we should choose,
To leave it standing?
yes, if the rec department can use it, if we decide to go with the one, balanced or unbalanced?
If we went with the current configuration, we have to actually do that. You guys did the maintenance costs over 5 years at TJ. We would actually put that back into the option if you choose to keep that building online.
Correct.
But we wouldn't have to remodel classrooms and
Right.
all that stuff.
Right.
So we just make sure that your specifications.
Right. Yep.
And we could pick, we have those all itemized, you can pick and choose what
Right.
you thought you would keep that.
Yeah, and we've also, you know, obviously, the other expressed desire of the community is the wraparound care after 4K. Yeah, and if Riverside were available for that, or, you know, additional space at the elementary schools or TJ, that would be another area where the community has already expressed interest in wanting that level of programming. So. All right, we ready for photos?
Yeah. So these plans provided by Epson Ewan, if you guys can jump in and help me describe some of these. Starting with Ben Franklin, this is the unbalanced partner, and this is what sums up the cost now for like line item X that you're questioning in the first pyramid. In orange, it signifies basically medium remodel relocating classrooms, taking 2 classrooms, bringing them into 1 classroom. And then in areas of blue text, it's changing use. So we carry costing at a much lighter scale, making you have to go in and revamp things accordingly. So this is the first floor at Ben Franklin.
So what are those rooms now?
So those are 4K rooms, we're gonna remodel 4K rooms?
This is actually the conference room. When you walk in, that's that first conference room, and making that large enough to actually be a full classroom. This is at the end where I think they do some of the therapies currently, and that would actually expand that out to be a full classroom. And then these are currently kindergarten rooms on the other side.
And you don't have to do any more classroom bathrooms in this kindergarten.
Yeah, they've got, these are restrooms.
And then there's restrooms here.
And I think that the upper left 5K has bathroom facilities, but I'm not sure about the
Yeah,
one on the
these
right.
are, we've got year to year, and then we've got some here as well.
But in the existing rooms, it seems like there might be one in the upper.
I'm gonna go under the assumption that you guys have done your job to put all those in where you need them, right?
Yeah.
That's first floor,
Right,
second.
I'm just trying to, right?
Right. Second floor, no major remodeling, it's just changing use.
What does SE stand for?
Special education. I mean, it's going to get divided up into a variety of categories, but we just lumped it in for now just to make sure we have the stations and the sizes.
And what were they before? What were those rooms before? Just
Those are classrooms.
classrooms?
It's just you have to allocate a number of specialized sections for the volume of kids that you have in the building.
Riverside would be the next change in use on the first floor. Change in use on the second floor. Not much going on here.
Are there any furniture costs that are included in this?
No.
So it seems that.
Well, let me put it this way, we have a factor. Yes, we, as the change in use, there's a factor built on top of that. So if you're changing a room, yes, there's going to be costs for furniture with that.
So for instance, in the middle school and high school, we have specific library changes. So furniture has been consciously factored in those.
But for example, that 4, number 4, what was it before? 3? There probably wouldn't be any cost in switching it up.
Exactly.
You just move
Yeah.
them in and you change the teacher.
If we found that a change in use was going to predicate furniture, we made that recommendation.
Shady Lane is, I'll show you 2 drawings documents, we combine the 2. So this is very basic on how use the building, lower level, nothing happens in that accordingly, but this is moving the admin in the classrooms to create the secure entrance, and then change in use.
Just to refresh everybody's memory, the problem is that parents right now are parking across the street and running over. And we're very concerned about that safety issue, and then there really isn't parking available up here. So the intent was to try to provide a modicum of parking really in this asphalt area, and one of the other plans does maybe a more extensive job of doing so. So essentially what happens then, you end up with a bus loop, and we've got a little bit of additional asphalt in here, and it keeps the parking away from the building to allow that bus loop to occur in a proper manner, counterclockwise, and it moves the administration area so that we've got that safety, security, secure entrance sequence, and again, it's just, to us, it was common sense because we no longer just are able to pull up on this busy street and so forth. So listening to end users came up with a solution.
And that's the only building without a secure entrance at this point? The double entrance, like,
Yeah.
the other ones, they all got.
It's secure, but
It's not the double entrance.
Well, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying,
They
it's
have
not
to
the
come in and
Yeah.
then come around still.
I don't
That's what I mean,
recall
it's
if
not
we
a
had
double,
visual
right.
connectivity, and this is going to provide
Little
that.
window.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is traffic really going to move smoothly in that area?
Well, I think once you get on site, the idea would be to, make the drive for a drop-off and back out again, and then parking here. And then with designated parking here as well for staff. And we have a more extensive plan on one of the other pyramid options that you may want to mix and match. We think that's a better option because it clearly designates this area. So we think it's an.
So yeah, this is considered a refined entrance. So that's right away.
Yeah, if you want to, Sean, if you know how to get there quickly. Yeah, here we go. So here's that parking in the back that we talked about, and the green strip was intended on offsetting some of the paving in order to hopefully not throw you into a stormwater detention requirement. So this one, because as Dr. Griffiths said, we've got some programming additions here, therefore we have to have a building addition to put the main entrance, 1,750 square feet, so it gets relocated from here to here. We would still have the loop that would come around, this fashion parking, but then staff parking would be back here, be fenced off, and then the green strip as well. So we think it's a big safety improvement for the building.
So do you still use the pull-up, Brad, for parents on the right side?
I mean, yeah, I think that's just details of use, and I don't think it really has anything to do with the building,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't
That's
say I'd have it
totally
leaking through the
used.
parking lot, because it's a pretty tight parking lot. You lose a lot of parking space that I'm not sure you'd regain with the new one. We have that drive-through on the east side over there that I think would still be utilized. But what you would free up in the parking lot is visitor parking space, which there is essentially none of right now.
Yeah, that's
So by moving the staff to that that west side of the playground on the north, you free up for visitor parking in front of that entrance, which right now, there's no good way to get to that entrance, and we're having a hard time funneling visitors in through our front office, which is our most secure entrance, so this would create that, as would the other option.
So where is the parking going to be down in the front? You're going to have a loop for by the new blue box. I understand that's going to be.
Well, we
office there.
felt that you'd still have, the ability to drive through in this fashion. But if you didn't do that and you drove this way and let students in here, after first bell, anyone that needed to come in would park and they would come into the secure entrance sequence so that, the inner doors would be locked. You can always get out by code, but you'd be, ushered into the.
This would actually
admin
function
area.
really similarly to Ben Franklin, because the buses line up along Ben Franklin, the children enter into the side of the building upon entrance, but then visitors actually come to the front of the building. Currently, this is all filled with staff parking, so visitors actually have no entrance. When parents drop off, 9 times out of 10, they're actually coming in this way for childcare entrance.
You wouldn't have, like Valley View, when we have like a concert or a big school event, you come down and park on the playground, so we wouldn't, how do you do this?
They fill the streets up all over the place when they walk. It's not a very good situation. We have in the past, I think
It
one.
wouldn't be open to come out, like during the regular day, when kids are out on the asphalt and everything, you have a fence, but if, is there a gate that is, are you guys need the gates?
Can you scroll up a little bit so you can see the entrance? Right now, the biggest problem preventing us from doing that, well, this wouldn't solve that, but that entrance is a single lane entrance.
Well,
It
this is
doesn't.
gonna be white if we do this.
Right, I'm saying right now it's a single lane, so we don't have people going in because it wouldn't be safe going in and out. Right now, this would obviously widen that entrance, but it also has it sectioned off from the playground. But this would just increase, it wouldn't only move parking, it would substantially increase parking.
I'm just thinking that if somehow you created an opening out onto the asphalt when you had a concert or something at night, that that you still fill up the asphalt,
Right,
ground.
you create sort of the overflow effect, which you're talking about is something here to connect, the green area would have a break in it.
Right.
And you'd have this all overflow, which would make perfect sense.
It would, it's exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, again, in all fairness, this has been developed, at a very rudimentary level, we just haven't had the engagement time to get it.
It's like change costing with what.
No,
it's
these are just refinements.
There.
Valley View actually has the most change out of all the schools, I think it's safe to say, starting in the lower level. Change in use and sort of remodel in this area. Model consolidating classrooms or changing classrooms. And same thing with third floor.
So is that taking 3 classrooms and turning it into 2, essentially?
Yes.
In those spaces?
So you move in the art, or am I still on the floor? I'm just asking.
Yeah, it's shown, or second, third floor. Yeah.
Well, it's third floor for the art.
Yeah, they've got a couple of different floor names for it, but yes, you're right.
Lower level.
Basement first, second, or first, second, third.
On the elevator, it's 1, 2, 3.
Should we be looking at these changes at Valley View when we're also looking at possibly closing Valley View?
Well, that's gonna be one of the things that we're gonna have to decide.
This is the middle school. Trying to think through the options. This would correlate with. It's not going to, the project would lead the way it really is shown on here. It's a good.
Yeah, actually, it is up here, it's the PLTW.
Okay.
And then science casework we do. And then, of course, most significantly was the concept of having a drive, sort of in what would be the new front, resurrecting the old front of the building again, and relocating admin basically down, and then the location of a new band room next to the auditorium for enhancement of programming.
When I was just, when you say band, do you mean like orchestra, band,
Yes.
choir, like the whole music department?
Yeah, the whole suite, yeah.
Because that is one thing I did want to point out,
Right.
that currently our our choir is growing, and we right now don't have a room for the choir to we don't know what we're going to do, we're trying to figure that out. Which is a good, I mean, it's good that it's growing.
Yep, exactly.
This project lead the way in the high school.
Yeah, there were several concepts, so, this is just one of them, but the most significant aspect is that auto shop becomes energy and power, and the various gradients of remodeling are shown. There's a relocation of wood shop with ceramics, and what that does then is creates a suite in here. Gary Phillips was involved in this concept. These areas would be relatively untouched. There would be improvements in airflow because some of the work had been done. These art rooms remain as they are, but other areas are going to require enhancement. The dust collector would remain on the exterior in the same location, but would be replaced because problematic. And we did check to make sure that the ductwork can in fact go to the center if necessary. So right now, this would be basically a project lead the way combination of shops and clean rooms, if you will, for their design center. Very exciting concept that we talked about last night.
You still have some connection with lighting and openness?
Absolutely, yeah. We're just actually finishing the latest version of the project lead the way guide with an SOE, and you'll have all the latest lighting technology accommodations. We'll even make this 2-hour firewall, create openings with ceramic fiberglass so that it can enhance programming and people can come down and take tours and showcase the area.
And it leaves enough room for your
Oh, yeah.
all around
Art wouldn't lose anything. We're very careful at making the square footage smaller. So that's really not a gain or a loss, but rather just a change in location.
That is everything for Pyramid 1. Pyramid 2, the balanced configuration for the elementary schools. Starting out with that. Same idea behind the graphical representation, it's just a matter of square footage change and area perfected.
You're just gonna kind of show us the differences, so that's very, you're not gonna go through the whole thing.
So there's more remodeling required for 5K, lower level.
You notice the 4K doesn't change, that wing is as it is. Taking some small classrooms, taking 3, putting in 2 on those 5K areas.
It's the highlights for Ben Franklin. Compared to before, there's more activity at Riverside, remodeling within the school. Prior before, we just had change of use. This is primarily down here in the ground floor.
And that's changing what currently is very big rooms.
Currently right now. And OTP, things like that. Speech, they're all small suites.
Taking multiple small spaces, making less bigger spaces.
Shady Lane is roughly, the numbers in Pyramid 2 include the refined entrance, but as far as configuration go, with the exception of moving the admin, nothing has changed prior to compared to the other.
What's all that open space?
Those are actually available classrooms. That was one of our concerns, that with some of the configurations, you end up with extra space, just because of the way things are.
There's still not speech or ELL or reading or math, so, I mean, you would create more space, but there's a lot of rooms, and I think that was Scott's question about Riverside, is there's a lot of, we got reading, math, ELL, reading recovery, a lot of those that aren't accounted for.
Or TPT, so where did all those rooms go?
So we'll probably
Or special ed, or?
We'll probably need you to label and see what we really got open.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right.
We did involve Kathy at one point to help go through some of the drawings, but I don't know if we got through all of them. Kathy's our, so we did translate, but, when we get down to, we have to refine this.
So did you look at that again?
No, that's going next. So Valley View, the change from before is less square footage of remodel, but we have a 3,000 square foot addition.
Yeah, open space at Shady Lane, build something for the building.
Remember, this is to try to accommodate balanced partners. So,
I
mean, they're,
You tell your next door neighbor, that's not, they won't keep this.
that's something they would take with the balanced partners.
I think that's one of the dilemmas with working with existing schools and trying to, take that curriculum.
Middle school and the high school are the same as before. I don't think we need to revisit that anyway.
Was that addition a single story?
No, it's multiple-story.
To match the current building. And then moving on to Pyramid 3, which is replacing TJ with a newer updated school. We don't actually have a drawing for anything, but it's just hypothetical. The school is certain square foot of TJ.
Pull up the drawing that we have with the TJ, because we did look at one. had talked about is if TJ were reconstructed, we had actually talked about having this area be extended into parking and possibly the replacement of the soccer fields.
Right.
And then there's a grade down here, obviously you do the demolition, and then I'm assuming we would place the building something to a similar area of the current footprint on that upper flat level.
Exactly, because it's vacant, and it's rebuilding.
Starting on Riverside, Pyramid 3. We would not have, let's start with Riverside. Central office would then be located here at Riverside, so we have costs there for remodeling that portion. And some other associated work. Shady Lane gets the more advanced entrance in this option. We talked about that. Project leads away still at the high school. And middle school remains all the same. Forgetting anything?
So really, the third option keeps Ben Franklin essentially as it is.
As it is currently, correct.
It adds a new Ben Franklin type building on the TJ site, and it keeps Shady Lane, but adds classroom space, office space to accommodate additional classroom space, so it could be 4K through 5.
So at that point, when we sell the Little Creek,
If we brought TJ online, the likelihood of us utilizing Lily Creek for a 25-year period of time would be low. If we demoed TJ and left the property available for future use, you could have an argument that, the board wouldn't need Lily Creek. If we sold the property of TJ, and then I would recommend to the board that you not get rid of Lily Creek. And so all of that would be dependent on what your decision would be with the property itself of TJ. That's 22 acres. So it would be big enough for an elementary school. And they typically, you could do a middle school, you wouldn't necessarily have all of the field space, but we don't now. We believe we have in front of the board now every option that we previously discussed. We believe we've shared what the plus deltas are, on each of the options. Now it's really a matter of determining what you believe as a board are the highest priorities, and then what structure you would want to build for additional community feedback groups, so that you're indicating to the community, the process that's been used to vet each of the options, but you're advancing what you think are the strongest options going forward, and then getting that additional feedback loop from the community.
I personally know what we talked about, as I said before, is I'd like to see what makes up these different numbers. So that we can, as we sit down and prioritize, we would really need X as a piece of that, we need parts of it, but not all of it. And then, the board probably may also need to talk about, what the tier should be in the
tier.
Right, and that's really,
That needs to be looked at too.
what I would recommend, Faith, is actually if the board, having the board at a readiness stage to talk about that, and then if a tier isn't a high value and you aren't going to consider it, we wouldn't invest a lot of their time in doing the detail around that tier. So if you know now you're not going to consider something, don't expend additional staff time in order to pursue the detail around that. And so that would be the conversation point, I believe. So,
And just from my understanding, advanced entrance to Shady Lane, that's pulling it around the back. Is that correct? Is that correct?
the advanced entrance is the additional parking in the back and the additional classrooms in the front.
Moving the entrance to the center of the,
The expansion on that would be the expansion for office space, so you can make classroom space out of the current office space. To me, it seems option 3 is just hard, too hard to swallow, too community really to invest in that kind of extra footprint and reconfiguration cost. We're not sure where the real is. So to me, it's between options 1 and 2, but I guess I don't know what, besides the effect on students potentially in the transitions and the unbanked schedules that I think are manageable. But is there anything to be gained between running more sections out of the school, more open spaces, being able to right-size the classrooms, and if there's some operational efficiencies to be gained from a balanced approach versus an unbalanced approach?
The operational efficiencies come in more, that's when you get that.
Right.
Versus balanced is only, the operational efficiencies should be the same. You have, grade 5s and grade 3s.
In the right schools. That's the other thing. Because I don't know if you have the right school classroom configurations with the buildings as is. The problem with school size.
Well, that's why the ones that are not split between Valley and Shady will not be the same as the split between the other sides. And again, if you go back to ideally saying this is what we have, what happens if you plan for that? And then the following year, you have a kindergarten class that's massive.
Right.
Then that just, you have to have a little flexibility.
Yes.
And they need 2 more rooms. Something like that.
Yeah, that's where I was wondering with the balanced approach, will there be more flexibility options on balanced approach? Doing that in addition, there is more open space to balance the classrooms instead of having at Franklin with 23 students and another school with 19.
What's our flexibility today? Forget partner schools and balance. What's the flexibility today? That's nothing.
Redistrict. Until you get the classroom size right.
Right, but we don't have issues now, right?
We do. We've got some schools with really small class sizes and others with big.
But some of that's self-created due to open enrollment.
No, we're just filling seats. I mean, we have to run the class at Valley View, so then we're filling the seat because we're running the class anyway. So
We're already putting open enrollment on.
I know.
But we have, the class of 56, students is 28s, 2 28s, or 3 less than 20s, and then we fill it with open enrollment.
As long as it's K-3. If it has to be 5, you're stuck.
Right, and we generally give a little leeway to the 5th, 4th, 5th grade with adding an aid, and maybe run the 27 or 28. Not like we're not wanting to do that, but the rest of the choices you get.
And I'm not trying to reintroduce anything. But remind me again why because at the end of the day, whether you're balanced or unbalanced, you still have 4 elementary schools.
Correct.
And closing out, considering closing one or two, the only option was to blow up EJ and we can do something there, right, to close something.
When we had talked about, in the last meeting, we talked about would there be an upside of operating only 2 elementary schools and closing Valley View and Shady Lane, building a big TJ. The downside of that is each of the buildings, Ben Franklin and TJ, would house 900 children. Yeah, so we ruled that one out and didn't do a drawing on that because we felt that that was too large of an elementary school in order to advance. The advantage of option 3 is you're only sustaining 3 elementary schools. So you're actually able to pull one of the buildings offline that you wouldn't have to reinvest in, and you have a brand new building, and your other 2 buildings have been updated. You know, so that's the upside of option 3. You know, obviously the downside is it's the most expensive alternative.
I'm favoring option 3. But I'm still not sure about the addition of the field house at the high school.
And what we put on there was every project recommended. Yeah, so, and as Faith indicated, you may determine even the ordering would shift on some of these, so that we can get into after we kind of have an idea of where the board direction wants to go. You know, if we don't have to deal with the elementary configuration first. You could weigh in on the other elements on what you think are the highest priorities to include, and then come back
and the elementary configuration, and then we're affecting our high school. I mean, it's kind of push-pull.
I know.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, if we don't do
If we
anything.
don't do anything at all at the elementary level, and we can't control the class sizes, then you're constantly going to the high school for any cuts, any sort of cuts.
It's true or false, though. I mean, right now you're running 4 elementary schools. You're still going to run 4 elementary schools, right?
We probably could get rid of one teacher somewhere between Valley View and Riverside, or Shady Lane.
I understand.
Because Valley View has 2 small classes.
I understand.
So that's what she's saying. If we had a way to be efficient, then we'd be able to save some programming at the high school or the middle school.
I understand that, but at the same time, you're still running 4 buildings, utilities, people, yeah, okay.
But
take
going
out-
to a bigger school is operationally, you're going to be more efficient with newer equipment, but you're still going to need custodial, you know.
I understand that.
Some of that cost gets shifted.
I understand that, but you also got to look at return on the spend. Okay? So if you keep 4 buildings, regardless of efficiency, if you save a teacher, save 2 teachers, okay? That's not going to change what has to happen at the high school, because a teacher for a salary of $100,000 is not, it'll cost you 10 times that much to do all the reconfigurations to save $100,000. So I'm going to do $10 million in elementary renovations to balance or unbalance, and then only save $100,000 at the end of the day. I'm not agreeing that a new school is right either, but we have to be realistic on what you're saving versus what you're spending for some of the configuration suggestions. So back to Pat's point, my first discussion is, what's the most important thing? Is it the STEM Academy? Does that position us in the high school? You know, to me, it's maintenance cost, it's educational gains, and then underneath that, it's configuration and building, configuration and all that stuff, right? To me, the most important thing is what you want to stand for educationally first and what has to change. Secondarily, you've got operational efficiency, and then you've got safety and things like redoing entrances for safe community, just like we do in finance. It's like, what's the benefit? Is there an educational benefit? Yes. Safety? No. Okay, we'll prioritize 1, 2, 3. And that's what you're looking for, that, right? I mean, we're looking for all of it, but we're trying to weigh in on the total package. But I want to know if you want to do the auditorium first or the STEM Academy. To me, that's even more important than 1, 2, or 3. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to give them a menu list that says, we found $10 million of things, okay? And we're going to use $2 million in fund balance, we're gonna use $2.5 million in referendum, shelf, and we'd like $5 million for these 3 ideas. Public, what do you think about these ideas? Right? Isn't that what we're gonna try and do? I'm just
No,
trying to-
I agree with you.
You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's-
Exactly, and I agree with that. We have to decide what we want educationally first.
Yeah.
And then all the rest of it falls around it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, pyramidally, forget the total package. It's the priorities within each package, and then how does it fit into the final package?
And then we do a survey like we did the last time. Here's what we absolutely feel we have to have educationally. And then here's some nice to haves, which would be maybe the field house, or maybe the new music room here, or the nice to haves, and maybe they bite off on it, maybe they don't. But what do we absolutely have to have first?
But I don't think we should fool ourselves into thinking there's operational efficiencies here with a 4-building configuration, because there really isn't. Long-term of any significance. Somebody?
I agree. I mean, when I initially thought, yeah, partner schools, that's the answer because that gives us staffing efficiency. And we don't have to build a new building. But that's
Still
not a
run 4
long-term
buildings.
approach. That's a short-term
Still
approach.
run 4 buildings.
Exactly.
You could decide to do nothing with the partnership and to decide to do everything with the education priorities and then deal with that down the road. I mean, there's a lot of options. that we could.
Well, the partnership idea might fit as a 1-year, I mean, as we looked at the time frame for a referendum, if we can't get things moving in a relatively quick pace, we may be stuck with a 15, 16 year. That may be a short-term, 1-2 year fix till we get everything else roll out.
Short-term fix with some major disruption that we have to be willing to live with during that time. But the long-term approach in my mind is the expensive approach up front, but the long-term, probably most efficient approach long-term.
I mean, look,
which is
you could have $1 million operating deficit and ask for $1 million every year for 10 years. Or you could blow up an elementary school, but then take 20 years to pay off a $20 million bill.
And use up all
Still
your
$1 million a
goodwill.
year. So, which is better,
It sounds to me, having worked with a lot of districts, the board is kind of at a point where a prioritization exercise that you do would be really beneficial to you, where you actually spend some time. Mitch and I've got a couple strategies you can throw out about how you could actually brainstorm that out and then start to see where they're ranking and prioritizing, so that eventually you create these drivers, right? These are the project drivers. This is what you absolutely feel must be accomplished educationally. What other goals do you have about increasing operational efficiency, staff efficiencies, all the variables? You tell us what matters to you. And then you can take these options and you can evaluate them against these drivers and see which ones really start to clearly fall off the radar because they don't rank, they don't meet your objectives. And I think if you take some time to do that, I think you'll see which options might still be in play, and then it becomes part of that immediate impact and a long-term analysis. What's the short-term impact? What's the long-term impact? And that is what you need to start to have a conversation with your community about. You say, these are the drivers. What do you think of those? Number one, do you agree that these are the same priorities? Because if your community doesn't value the same thing that you value, you're going to have trouble advancing a solution no matter what it is. So the earlier you start to have a conversation, you're talking to staff about, are those priorities the same? I'm seeing different heads nodding in different places. Those conversations are driven by you setting the framework. And it's like we have all the foundational knowledge that you need. Now you have to create the drivers and then start to create a metric to evaluate is really what you do. And then you can share that to the community and through various different strategies to get it out there. But I think you're close. You just need to put it into.
Oh yeah, we got the whole menu in front of us. Just gotta see if you want 2 appetizers.
Wait, no, you know what you're hungry for, right? I mean, that's the problem. What's
And
what's
everybody
really most
likes
stressful?
something else. That's the fun.
And then your community might value something even different.
Absolutely.
You know, if part of what you need to evaluate, you mentioned survey. Survey process is a great way to vet priorities for projects like the ones you're talking about. And that has to be evaluated against tolerance and willingness to pay. Because if you go down a road where you're not considering that, and then you just kind of do this, it's not a good strategy.
We have a survey in the budget for this coming year, right?
But we have to figure out what we're going to put on the survey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pat, Pat, what do you guys want to accomplish for the rest of the night?
Well, I wanted to ask Kit how long she thought this exercise would take. We're here, we've all budgeted till 9 o'clock.
Oh, I would think that would need
Somebody said that work
a
out
separate
there.
night, no. I would think you need to come back and we could brainstorm some, effective ways to do that for you. Give you some options and I would recommend another work session like this. Come in fresh.
Although I kind of was concerned, because
I
it's
think
summer
you've done
for
great
us,
work.
and we kind of like to not have to be here either.
Yeah.
Captive audience is better than
We're here, let's go out.
Besides, we have pizza and soda.
Right now, you just want us to jump in?
Yeah. Are you guys
I mean,
okay?
Pat, what do you?
Sure.
What else do we need to accomplish?
We need to figure out what's important to us.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Maybe.
What do you want to go
We
tell
can't
your
keep
neighbors
putting
that
it
you're
off.
standing
We need
for?
to start talking about it.
Right?
Sure. Excellent.
Paul, are you all right?
What about just a basic plus? No, you could do a couple different things. One would be the plus delta on the 3 different elementary configurations.
No, we want to figure out.
I would
what's
go to the
most
option
important
jet.
thing.
I would recommend
That's
you
priority.
identify what your drivers are. What are the most important things that matter to you? Like, we could brainstorm something. Use that white paper and do it?
Let's do it.
All right.
So what are the 3, what are buckets we use in finance? Educational priorities.
Oh.
Safety.
Safety.
And
Start.
what's the other one?
Government
You want to put those up there,
regulation.
Stay away from
education,
that.
safety?
I'm trying to help organize, because it's really educational, right?
Okay, but let's wait, before you go too far, let's make sure you all know what you're talking about when you talk about educational drivers. What does that mean? It might be something different to each of you.
Program.
Okay, so I heard program, do you have specific programs? Do you want to talk about Project Lead the Way? Do you want to talk about, when you say program, that could be huge.
Strategic things that do something
Okay,
to
our
this
students
district
for
to
college
position
career
us
readiness.
better.
Okay, I heard about 6 things.
Prepares our students for college and career readiness.
Okay,
Is that what you're saying, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, why do I want to come to this school? They've got the best STEM academy in Waukesha County, and they're doing great things. I want to be a leader in technology. That's an educational priority, potentially.
okay.
Okay, so do we list some of these things and do what they do in
What about,
classrooms and use the
program?
city tags?
Does program also include class size? Is that a separate element, or is that all included? Element?
I would put class size under programming. I would put
Small class. Maintain small class.
there's sustained reasonable class sizes.
What's Germantown versus something like 28, 29 elements?
We may have to cave.
That's like insane.
Okay, so program goals, college career readiness, technology, maintain reasonable class sizes, what else what are drivers programmatically?
The music in this district is a driver programmatically.
These are cannot live without.
These are things that the community, this is back to the menu. Everybody values music and fine arts in this district. Strong contingent does. Just as much as a strong contingent wants us to be better leaders in some of the high-skilled stuff, right? We're there with healthcare, we're there with business, we like to get there with technology, right? Feels that way.
Innovation.
Is that back to STEM? Same concept, right?
Specific to STEM, Project Lead the Way,
Two votes
et
for
cetera.
STEM and Project Lead the Way. I mean, I don't think anyone, I can't imagine anyone here would be against that as a priority. A top 5, right? If you are, speak up now, because I'd like to hear it. I mean, really, right?
Okay, so educationally, this is your brain, because this is your brain health, and it's a little hard to do it if you're not really ready, but we'll try. What other things that you just, you think about is your role as board members, your responsibility to foster, enrich, protect.
Those
Got
are
it?
the things that are in this budget. The rest of the stuff we're going to get to. technology would include the fiber that needs to be.
So you're talking program and infrastructure.
Yeah, because we're gonna have to find this out, one on the high school, which I know.
I'm gonna throw out there like meeting individual needs because differentiating in the classroom requires space. And that's an educational priority in our district is really being able to differentiate within the room to meet the different kids' needs and not teach for the whole class. Yeah, so individualized education, I guess, would be it.
So
Are
when
you saying, Lynn, then in your north piece here, there is more than just the band room?
Right, because I don't know if you remember, Faith, what that opens up is, that opens up 5 different large rooms for, where teachers, when they're doing different, different projects or activities, that they can utilize those rooms, because the structure of some of the rooms, a lot of the rooms I know, they're so small, that to move about and to get to meet to different groups and things like that is impossible. So it has a dual, we talked about that, it has like a dual effect. So while it provides us the space for, like I said, like we don't have room for a choir right now. Our choir is growing, and we just don't have a big enough room for it. But, and then by moving all those music rooms into that one area, that opens up 4 to 5 larger rooms.
So whole business incubator versus class in a box.
Right.
Well, is that collaboration, flexibility?
Correct. Yep. That's what I meant by that, yeah.
Okay.
The whole common area.
Right.
Right. Who's kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah, we also made a point of emphasizing the libraries in the schools because, we have, your classrooms are the traditional kind. So if you're trying to do the active learning, you're going to do it as a function of technology, and you're going to do it as a function of at least having libraries and cafeteria and multi-purpose areas that can be used for knowledge.
Tape anywhere? Tape anyone in their purse? Wait, I see one little corkboard. Stick it over. Hey, well.
Got tape in your book?
Okay, that'd be good. Thank you.
Pat, can you refresh our memory with regard to what, I remember the discussion that was a while, changing the teacher planning area to student, what is it, student breakout area.
Yeah, that's actually creating, it's creating more small group work areas
He was taking-
at the high school level. They're not using it anymore anyway.
What's that?
They don't use it anymore.
That was his
It's-
point, right, yeah.
But it's not
Yeah.
configured, it's not configured for small.
Yeah, because we felt that would be a low impact as far as cost, but high impact in terms of education type thing, and it would be furniture based. So very much like what we were suggesting with the cafeterias, we felt that would be your one big breakout active learning area in the school.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge you not to think about the options right now, okay? Don't worry about the options and what's in the options yet. We're going to come back and we're going to evaluate those options to your brainstorming later. But let's just start with, so we just talked about educationally. These are the things that are non-negotiable. These are your priorities, your drivers. So let's talk about other things that matter. What else matters besides the program? When you think about facilities, you think about trying to advance your needs. You've got operational needs. You've got a budget deficit you're facing. Safety, okay? So let's define for a second what safety means, because it means something different to everyone. When you mean safety, what do you mean? Do you need a physical environment that's safe?
Some of the buildings, I think, the entrance,
Secure main entry?
Security. I think the bus drop off and parking is a safety issue at some school.
Okay, so bus, and I would say parent, pick up that whole sequence.
Yep.
We're defining our priorities as everything up here.
Hey, I'm telling you not to look at the pyramids. Put the pyramids away.
We've kind of already.
Well, let's just talk about safety. When you think about safety, what other site safety things? What does security mean to you? Is technology in this equation anywhere?
We've already covered, like as far as cameras.
Investment? I don't know. What's safety mean?
Well, I mean, we have minimal, we've done the bulk cameras, but
It would mean the expansion at TJ.
Okay, so it would be equity, right? This is what it's kind of big, outside the box, outside adoptions. You're trying to think about it. You want to have equitable, safe facilities, right? So everywhere you want, that's what the Franklin issue is, right? That's why you got it, okay?
So what are we talking about doing? You brought it online, you have cameras there as well. If we're going.
Okay.
Equipment can be moved, right? Cameras can be moved.
Right.
Okay, so when you mentioned safety, you're talking about secure main entrance sequence, primarily parent, bus drop off, general traffic patterns, so it's really sight, right? Is there any other safety factor that you need to be identifying?
Some of the basic stuff, maintenance.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
what if some people equate safety with maintenance? Maintenance of, there's, I don't even know how maintenance. Is there asbestos in the building somewhere? I kind of suspect someone's got asbestos in the building. Okay, that's good. What are other safety things from a physical maintenance? Mechanical, failure, change.
Keep all the operational stuff out of here.
Okay,
That's
so
not
you don't
like-
want that in there. Some
I
people
just,
do.
I just don't think it's gonna, all we're gonna do is rehash everything that we know is on the list from an operational standpoint. So it's really figuring out in order priority, the big things that we have that are on this list. It's basically ranking these things.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, you want to do STEM first or the auditorium? You want to do the North Middle School, thing, or you want to do the Shady Hill thing? Rank them. You have to
Except for you're going to
have to force
specific
rank them.
solutions already.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Because we've already come up with 90% of the
Right.
suggestions, I guess. That's rather than rehashing the origins of it. I mean, I appreciate it because I think it's helping us. But at the end of the day, we're trying to share everything.
And we've been through all of this in lots of years.
Okay, well, then, can you articulate that to your
The board needs to
community?
sit down and look at each other and say,
Right.
this is what we want. We have to do it anyway because we're having pay cuts for next fall.
Sure.
It's ugly, nobody wants to do it.
So you already know what your priorities are.
No, we don't, that's what I'm saying. We need to do that as far as programs, and I agree with you.
But my point is to rehash
Okay.
and restate them. It's less important, I think, than saying, what do you think is the number one priority on this list?
I would go with STEM. If you want to go that way, if you want to start with that.
That's my question.
And we can build, we brought, to kind of go through that exercise tonight, we brought a blank pyramid. So we put those three options together in the pyramid, saying, just to give you ideas of, here are three ways that you could prioritize options and all these concepts that we have. Right. You have a blank pyramid, if you want to start filling it out and say, all right, from your perspective, starting at the bottom being the most important, how would you build today, how would you build that pyramid? And then at some point, if you fill the entire pyramid up all the way to the top, you may say, all right, of that pyramid, we're only comfortable drawing a line here on the pyramid. The rest of it has to happen later. Well, it's one way to look at it, and formulate options.
Michelle, you guys got another opinion on how to advance the ball a little bit?
If you're ranking, I mean, I put the STEM project leads away at both the high school and middle school, the base. Auditoriums are gonna be still a need to do, but maybe less.
Right, but do you agree with the concept? Do you want to flesh
And
that out?
then
for
the
us?
field house would be top of the pyramid, pipe dream kind of thing.
Right.
Would there be wisdom, and I guess I'm going to ask elementary principals to work together on rank ordering of the elementary configurations, which ones you would put in what order of recommendation? And,
That should be a part of the basis.
and board, what I would recommend you do is individually order each of the sections, and then let's bring it back to the whiteboard and determine where those rankings lie. Everyone else on the team, I'd ask you to do the exact same thing. If you were advancing the recommendations in order based on what you view as the highest priority needs, which order would you place them in? Do them individually, and then we'll pull the data back to the front. And elementary principals, I'm going to ask you to work together on advancing your order of recommendation regarding the elementary options. obviously, any of this is going to continue to be shaped. Does that make
When you
sense?
say elementary options, what are you saying?
The balanced partners, the TJ, or you're leaving the buildings as is. Does that make sense? All right, everyone is going to individually do their own rankings first. Is that clear? On each of the elements?
Tab would you like to do it? Which of the three? So there's, since I'm writing it down. You want to do it on 1, 2, or 3, doesn't matter.
I'm leaving 1, 2, and 3 almost generic because above that base, they're all the same. Okay? So you guys identify which ones that you're going to be doing your ranking. Start individually in order. I'm going to ask the principals to think beyond their own school. All right? We have one of two options right now. We could actually pull together as a whole group and see where people's thoughts are. We could actually break into smaller groups of 4 going across the table to have an interim conversation. What's your preference? As far as comparing.
Guys, what do you want to do? Small group and consolidate, or
I would like the board in discussion.
you'd rather have a separate, do a different way?
I mean, we can do it here, we can do it now, or if we take, yeah, so it's something to do, but I would like to see, either way, the board's votes, I'd like to see them separate columns, because ultimately it's going to fall on our shoulders. And we love the rest of you guys, but ultimately, the whipping and the pounding and this whipping is on us. So,
Pitchforks and torches, right?
yeah, we need to be prepared.
All right, why don't Scott and you relocate over into that corner? Leadership team, I'm going to have you guys combine over here. You guys create a ranking and identify where you're at, and the board can do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got this group's kind of consensus, all right? If we take a look at, if we take a look at the feedback, elementary principals and the balance of the leadership team, we recognize their ideal preference would be to leave the configuration as is and not do balanced partners. Just as is configuration at the elementary school with the 5-year maintenance as the highest priority. So if you look at this on the elementary level, it's as is and the maintenance as priority 1.
And now you still need an addition for the 4K there, if you choose to go that way.
They're currently saying as is, period, just as is. Okay,
Just
so.
before you go any further, as a board, we just left hold on block as the building block. We just separate them from there.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so.
That's good to hear
There's,
their educational perspective.
yep, that was elementary principals. There's a portion of the group that still believes that the option with the new building actually mitigates the impact of continuing to operate 4 elementary schools. So that was not a consensus of the group, but that's actually how the bottom part was balanced. And 5-year maintenance fell as number 1 in both sides of the ledger. Okay, from there, we went to the fiber. And from there, we went to project Lead the Way. From there, we went to the libraries. And we did both. We did something interesting to the North Auditorium. For North, plus music, but eliminating, we did, but eliminating the office reconfiguration, no drive-through changes. They believe the additional music space connected to the auditorium addition was that tier, the high school auditorium. And then in our recommendation, we do minimal upgrades to TJ on this side of the ledger to keep it as functional space, recognizing it's not a long-term solution, but it keeps it functioning. And that would be a later decision for the community and keep it operating, which would probably mean boilers and regular low-grade, maintenance. So that's where we landed.
And then we had the Shady Lane.
Shady Lane entrance was somewhere here.
What was the TJ? I'm sorry.
What?
What do you hear?
Fix the boiler.
Fix the minimal pieces to keep it operating. So that was it.
We need a demo for Iowa.
Oh, demo for Hiawatha is kind of like right here. Yeah. We get that off the property.
I think we can rank that cost 5 years.
Okay? So that was our ranking.
Is that all the feedback you have?
That was it. The largest amount of discussion was really regarding the elementaries. Obviously, on the one hand, if we build a new building, you have 2 elementaries that, brand new and 2 lesser. Ultimately, the community is going to be faced with that at some point in time because we'd be continuing to operate 4 elementary schools. So, and TJ New would, rectify a part of the space needs at central office too, but, that isn't the highest priority. So, all right?
Yeah, well, the board, Dave's not here, so we only had 6 of us. So on everything, we were deadline 3 to 3, so we have nothing. Kidding. That's good. No, I mean, I think it's pretty similar. So we were actually, Project Lead the Way 1, 5 or 2, but we essentially were connected. Right? The only caveat to the fiber was rent versus own for a period of time to be debated, right? And then literally those were the clear runaway 1 and 2. So if you look at our total vote count, meaning lowest vote is the best, most priority. Project Lead the Way at 8 votes, 8 points, fiber upgrades at 12. All the other ones, 27, 29, 30, 31, and 31. So they essentially got grouped into a second pack, okay, with some varying opinions on what was 3, 4, 5 versus what was 5, 4, 3. But at the end of the day, the rest of them kind of all got lumped into, if you want the real vote, the real exact specific vote, library upgrades finished 3rd, barely, followed closely by North Auditorium, followed closely by the high school auditorium, followed it with a tie between Shady Lane and the North other pieces of it. However, we basically recognize that all of them, right, have value. So it was other than the Project Lead the Way and the fiber, we think that we have to kind of rip apart the other 4, kind of like you did, and figure out what's really important, need, want, like, and must have versus can wait or can do without. And I think then we probably have a pretty good working list. Did I frame that up for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to add to that?
No, but it's surprisingly very similar.
Yeah, I mean, and we chose not to break it apart, but I think we will have to break it apart based on prioritization. And then the other thing we talked about that we left off the list is the whole 5-year maintenance thing, but not to discount it. We actually recognize that that's as big of a deal as any of these other things.
So the question is, the same thing that we want, like, you know, do I re-caulk the tile, do I replace the tile? And which one's the most important? So I think we have to lean on these guys. Using yours, they've already done the list, you guys have to do your own internal, right, prioritization.
We've put it into that format that we're used to
Yeah.
looking at. We've got years 1 through 5.
Because I think at the end of the day.
But it's more than 650,000 a year.
Right.
So.
But it's also, is it a new tile to this extent, or is it just recalking? You know, that kind of thing, what's more expensive, it's not more expensive, but.
Right, that's where the prioritization.
Well,
Yeah,
we start
scoring.
getting into bathrooms and redoing all the ADA compliance and those things and toilets that are falling apart, you know, it's not just tiles, it's.
Right, plumbing, and there's all kinds of under the cover stuff that we can't see. That, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we kind of loosely agree that we're not sure that there's $25 million worth of ask to the community, but we're sure there's 10 to 15 to 18 that probably need to be considered if you're going to deal with this in one fell swoop. So we're never going to say do 25. Sorry guys. Right? We'll never. I don't think we ever. And no one's ever going to do the first proposal. But at the end of the day, we know that there's stuff that has to be done. And we'll just have to figure out what the real bill is versus the proposed bill. Right? So I guess that declares our opinion today.
Okay. And we want to finish with an asterisk if they need to weigh in.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, where do you want to go next?
What I'm hearing is that the base of the pyramid with 5-year maintenance, you're wanting to see a refined priority by building. I'm hearing that.
Yeah, well, it's by building and with total, right? It's almost by year across 5 years.
Okay, the maintenance and the bathrooms, we just consider that.
Yeah. And you've already got a head start, which is true.
Right, and then what I'm anticipating is in section R, you want those priced separately so that
Is it Sean? Was able to give us some form of breakdown of that, but we didn't realize it was an option to just do the banner and not the entrance, so he didn't really break that down. We got a line item that says enhance and the banner and entrance, so we didn't do that.
Okay. Is there anything else that you need broken apart?
Well, if there's anything in those auditorium upgrades that makes sense that we don't, that it's a big line item that we can do without otherwise. We may need to look at the shady piece in different chunks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
How
we
much is
think-
parking lot cost versus how much is just moving to office? Maybe we do parking lot, not the office, and the office and the parking lot.
Or if we don't do all the north stuff, we do the whole shady piece. I mean, we force ourselves to force rank everything, and I think we just have to go around to a force ranking, right? Maybe north parts 1 through 3, not 4 and 5, and it may be shady 1 and 2, but not 3, right? I think we kind of have, we forced ourselves to do that, and we may have to do that, recognizing that certain things come together, right? You do this, you have to do that. Okay, but then I don't have to do that.
And we didn't leave a line item for the boiler corrections at TJ, so that the rec fund continuing there, but that was assumed that it's not.
Yeah, that's part of the 5-year real bill, right?
As well as we spoke about O and P, which are the athletic upgrades at the field house, and thought maybe some refinement there, and put that as a separate, its own referendum question, which is what we did the last time. And there was quite a few people behind it, but we didn't really spend a great deal of time pushing it.
I thought that didn't make the ballot. That was on the ballot?
It didn't make the ballot because, but it also wasn't really
worked hard.
But it was his own referendum question.
There was the initial community survey.
Oh, on the survey.
There was the initial survey, and the vote was, 52-48, not 70-30 like the rest of it, so it kind of got dropped. But it also wasn't worked hard when the initial, it wasn't like, they didn't work the polls to
Then there's-
refine it. So
There
it
may
kinda-
be enough athletic parents that are.
Oh, no.
What are the project hybrid, like, to do an auditorium? What does that take in?
To renovate, kind of what we got into renovate.
How long would it be off under construction?
4 to 6 months, roughly, and that would depend on.
Depends on the maintenance we do. What we're looking at here is like 4 to 6.
And remember, we're just trying to set these up to then talk to the community about it, so, you want to get ahead of ourselves, but more importantly, we have to deal with the financial impact of the proposals. Because, right, isn't that more of the next step? So like Jeff, when you did your little one-pager about, here's what we could fit under the current debt service without impacting the taxpayer, I'm giving you more for the same, right? You'd have that as a line, and then you'd say, okay, here's the things that I couldn't cover with that, and here would be the impact of those things. That's probably as much of an important thing, I think, for the board to understand, once we figure out the next round of priorities, right? Because you could say, I had $10 million of projects, forget the maintenance, it's like I had $10 million of projects, and if I took $3 million over that over 5 years, I could do that with the current debt service rate, mill rate. That leaves me $7 million. Okay, but then I got $10 million of maintenance, so what's the impact, right? But we could layer that, we'll say $3 million in debt service, $7 million as an ask, and then there's $10 million down here, but half of it is for this, a third of it is for that, 20% is that. You almost give them this pyramid as you start to frame how you would talk to the public about it.
Where you say restrooms and maintenance you have to have, so here's $20 million, and gives $20 million for free, you get this $1 million.
Nice, I like it.
Well,
You
not
take
as
what
a
you-
salesperson, you get this for free, and then you list all that stuff.
Give a coupon?
That's how I would put it.
Pyramid in terms of mill rate impact.
Yeah, kind of what you're getting for your buck, and how we see the priorities: education, safety, operations, needed maintenance, and what it means to you if you agree to it. Right? That's how it basically starts, right?
Yeah.
Would you be taking the fiber out of the operational component and therefore addressing your gap there
What do you mean?
that way? Well, you've got 700,000 in your leverage, right, for your deficit, your operating. You're looking at your 1.8. I'm talking about there's like two sides of this equation. There's your operating deficit, which could be an operating referendum that's proposed. And if you remove the fiber from that and you put it into the debt question, then it could impact how much you would have to ask for.
Well, yeah, that's the other piece, of that, right? Because
the other part.
if we assume the configuration stays, we do have an potential operating deficit.
Correct.
Which is the third line of the ask, right? So, because we agreed, we tentatively agreed to operate as, didn't agree, but.
Right, so there's the deficit still on the table.
Jeff, what's the operating life of the fiber?
The last guy we talked with, Bruce Rawl, who did the preliminary design, thought it was plus 20 years. But I'll get it in writing.
So it makes sense to wrap it in as part of capital versus operating.
Probably.
And honestly, talking to Kettle Marine might be a great resource for you guys because they're literally doing that right now. It's literally being purchased and Carl is putting it in.
So what do we need to do next?
Next, we have to get feedback from the board on what you want to see the community engagement process look like and the timeline for that and the schedule. And then we'll have to nail down, the key components so that we know as we're framing the design of a survey recommendation, we know what we're planning. Okay, so that would be the next work session.
When do we think that's?
Challenge, obviously, is going to be We know in July, we have a joint finance personnel meeting, taking a look at the cost benefit analysis regarding health options. So that's going to be on your July 10th meeting. At the bottom of July, we're taking that board meeting to do a work session around compensation modeling, so that as we head into the school year, we know what direction we're headed with that. We could take, we've got August 14th, we could take that as, do a mini 45-minute regular board meeting and go into the balance of the evening on work session and that board meeting. We could add another meeting, but I know with travel schedules, it's going to be tight for everybody.
Well, one of those meetings we can still have
Yeah, and we'd also talked that could also go into the bottom of August too, into the end of after both meetings. Yeah, you could do that unless you want to add another meeting.
I think we've got a board meeting scheduled for August 11th.
Right.
And then we had a work session scheduled for Thursday.
That's the strategic planning night.
I mean, should we kind of just finance, should we take a whack at, the framework to bring back to the board on all the, just like you did that one short paper to me, we should frame that sucker in, by component, no rate impact, dollar. Maybe we should just take a whack at that so we can.
If you do that in finance during July, we could be prepared for a work session on August 11th.
So do you think, Jeff, we can talk it out then, and you can kind of frame that in pretty quickly? I mean, you got the framework, we just need to break it down by bucket and talk about it.
Does that sound acceptable? And then we'd start the board meeting at 6 o'clock, run 45 minutes in a regular board meeting format for whatever we need to do work-related wise, and then be into the agenda.
Which day are you talking about?
Monday, August 11th.
And you'll be there at 6.
Sure.
That's code for.
Italian is first, why not? But we don't have another, we have July 10th, and when's our next board meeting?
Next regular board meeting is until July 28th.
Okay.
And that's going to be a work session also. So that one's going to start at 6. We'd basically be saying both August board meetings would start at 6 o'clock, get 45 minutes of a regular board agenda, and then go into the meeting. The first one would be related to facilities. The second one would be related to, or kind of the same thing that we just did regarding programs.
And we don't have any other issues, we're rolling up to the annual meeting in September, right? Because we're budget balance, right?
We
Balanced
believe-
budget, we don't have any major.
And we'll do
other
our
issues.
budget updates and the budget approval during those 45-minute regular parts of the board meeting.
What?
Does that make sense? Principles, what it means for you guys is as we get into August, I'll have the board determine if you're there or if you're not there, but just so that you know that, all the principals are expected to be at that bottom of July meeting on compensation. Okay?
Can you tell us what the work session is on the July 28th?
That is related to compensation.
So does it sound like that the board is seriously interested in a spring 15 referendum? Considering that from a time frame, I'm trying to back up your engagement time frame.
Why don't you let us get through the July-August piece and see, because I think we got to hash out all the impact and everything.
And we have to decide what is our priority. If we need to go out with both pieces, capital and operating, capital, what it's not.
I mean, look, it's an easier timeline if you're going to maintain configuration, right?
much.
And we got a whole lot less constructions to deal with, and we're just dealing with educational priorities, so it's good and bad. I mean, it's not as good for these guys, but at the end of the day, it's simpler for us to frame out what we're looking for. You know?
What we were talking about over here was going to be right? We were going to be 1206, am I right, Mike? Is that what we
That
said?
shows spring of 2005. You went out April 5th of 2005.
Okay, so we
was the
went out
reference.
spring.
It was a spring, yes.
Okay, do we know when we went out on the one that was unsuccessful? Does anybody remember?
I can run
Yeah,
that.
successful.
Yeah,
I was.
I've got my binders still, I'll go back.
Can run it.
I have-
The one that was not successful?
Yeah, Gina she gave me the old one.
Which time of year was that? Because that would be important.
So you believe they're both this spring?
I think so.
The only thing is to beware of those people that are running this from Susan.
I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think we should be throwing the R word around too loosely until we get a point of view, because then you're gonna get more dust up than is required, because we don't have a final point of view, I think. I don't even know that hinting at it does you good, unless you want to just get people to the meeting. For the wrong reason.
Okay, so August 11th would be the next meeting related to facilities, correct?
You're okay with that? Timeline wise? Fits in, August and Thursday together? Right, not for hand advance.
Yeah, and you have two competing priorities. You want to advance clarity around the compensation modeling for the staff. We put that in July. We know this one is also important, and we know that meeting time is going to be tight over the summer. So I believe it's as good as we got. Right? Good. Thanks, everybody, for the time. Oh, after August 11th, actually after facilities identifies the ranking, if you guys identify areas that are high needs to tour, that was a board request, facilities is going to have to address which ones do you believe we need to get people into.
Does the board still want to do that?
Yeah, because then we would set Saturday morning tours if we wanted to.
I don't think, if we're not going to do anything today, we're not going to adjust the numbers. Because medically, the rest of it's just going to be fixing cracks.
So we'll take that as, no tours, so it's no tours. It's no tours, and we're gonna do a deep dive on organization and breaking down of some of the things, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Jeff, you can comment on that?
Yeah, we've got that prioritization pretty much done. I think we need to kind of maybe coordinate with us and this team and make sure we are on the same page.
And you guys would also have to figure out how to break apart that music edition.
Yeah, that would be.
Change it from band, because Lynn is right, it's band, orchestra, and choir. So do it as a music addition area, with separate costing from the driveway.
So is that, are you gonna bring that, and your piece of it for the 10? Or is that not, if that's not doable,
Is
then
that
just
easy to
say
break
it.
out?
Just-
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
That way, so that'll be our meeting, is to go over those two lists, and then we will figure out how to deal with the byline, kind of, you know, we'll build our framework for how we want to expand the sheet that you did.
Right.
That is.
At what
Right.
point do we talk about the three options? Balanced, unbalanced?
I think that they did.
We,
Basically,
and where we split was as is, no change in grade configuration or new building. Yeah, so that's kind of where the group kind of landed there. Right?
New building, no HSC.
Well, and that's where they're saying as is. The mixed configuration, no one on our side of the room is recommending as a viable option.
When you say mixed, you mean unbalanced?
Unbalanced. Yeah. We didn't see that as a viable recommendation.
And balance doesn't necessarily give us any operational.
It gives us,
Because staffing.
yeah, it gives us staffing efficiencies.
That we would lose from the masses.
So then do us a favor for, is there any way to just, not detail on, is there any way to give the simple math on the efficiency versus, because we know what the cost would have been for those buildings. So if you have any ballpark efficiency, right? If it's one teacher, then I know it's 70 grand. If
It's like 5 to 6 teachers, I want to say we came up with, similar to the exercise you and I did.
So it's.
Because I thought it was like 5 to 9 from last meeting.
Maybe it was that, 5 to 8, 5 to 8 is what's ringing in my,
Yeah.
That's all right.
So let's bring that. So let us bring that, and then we'll bring it back to the next time, because we'll go back and look at the construction piece versus the savings. Because you're either gonna ask for you're either gonna have an operating deficit of $500,000 every year that you have to ask for, or cut programs. Or you're gonna have an operational savings, but a cost that you have to amortize and see what the return is, right? So that's really the math that we almost have to show rather than just talk about it, I think.
And then I think you have to talk about the impact on student learning too, and I think that's why some of us were hedging, that whole small school versus large school thing, we'll talk about that as well.
Okay. But what do you mean, talk about?
Well, because we're back to the partner schools.
I'm sorry, what?
We're back to the partner schools where, so it would be.
I thought you were talking, not the building.
Not the
Okay.
big.
Balanced versus as is.
But I think there's still some things educationally that, we need to sort through.
Because saving 5 teachers doesn't happen just by doing partner schools. It happens by doing partner schools so you can increase class size. So I think we've got to discuss how willing we are to increase class sizes to save teachers.
So that was the assumption, it was a class size, that assumed.
That's the only way to save teachers, is to increase the class size and cut teachers.
It takes some of
Because
those.
the schools are unequal now. Some schools have really small class sizes.
That's not true, they're all equal now. You look across the board.
They're all
Within
equal.
a range.
They're running a lot lower than typical for upper elementary classrooms. That actually is the reality, because we're running with low, in some areas much lower than you would if you can collapse some of the classes. But you're right, you're weighing keeping class sizes at 23s, 24s versus 27s, 28s.
And someday, we would like to not maybe address that, because we're going to get to a point where you can only cut so many programs, and then a high school kid has to be in a class somewhere. So keep cutting, is he going to sit in study hall, or are you going to sit in something that's productive? Because we all know A is cheaper than teaching. So I think we all have to, I'm not saying we can run any cuts in elementary school, but these are the hard conversations that we're going to have to have.
And then I think we also have to look at the surrounding areas and see what their class sizes actually are. Because I know some teachers in some surrounding, and I know that their class sizes are right around that 17 to 22. So
Or Germantown's the opposite.
Germantown is 17 to 22, right?
No. Elementary?
Yeah.
No.
And Hartford with ours, that's.
Not according to PPI. They're higher than us. So we have to look at that, look at the facts. Don't know, we have to look at the facts.
Yeah.
Right. Right. All right. Okay, that.
Sorry, let's adjourn. Is there an option or an option?
Is there an option?
No option.
Motion.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for spending the evening.